Ghosting a legislative hearing on a $250 million fraud scandal is not a scheduling conflict. It is a systemic management default that suggests the liquidity of trust in our representation has reached a state of total insolvency.
Minnesota lawmakers demanding answers about possible ties between Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and a $250 million fraud scheme. Mike Tobin joins us. Is this all about that program that was supposed to feed children during COVID?
Well, there's a whole lot of it. You remember that Representative Ilhan Omar championed the legislation which Republicans say created the pathway for that Feeding Our Future scandal. A new financial disclosure also says she did not get rich while in office.
We are witnessing an unprecedented audit evasion where a sitting congresswoman is reportedly refusing to verify the ledger of her own legislative creation, the Meals Act, which state investigators claim acted as the primary regulatory loophole for the largest pandemic-era fraud in national history.
Her accountant got it wrong, her office claims, by as much as $29 million. Now, the Minnesota House Fraud Committee wants answers, and they're not getting them. Financial disclosures had said the estate of Omar and her husband, Tim Minette, jumped from being in debt to somewhere between $6 million and $30 million in 2024. They amended their financial disclosure and released it to show the estate is really somewhere between $18,000 and $95,000. They blame the multi-million-dollar discrepancy on an accountant who did not subtract the liabilities of Minette's businesses. And this is the same congresswoman who championed that Meals Act. That was the COVID relief program intended to provide food for poor kids suffering during the pandemic. It turned into a $250 million boondoggle with restaurants billing for meals that were never provided. A restaurant in the center of the scandal was a safari restaurant. Omar held campaign events there. One of the owners, Salim Ahmed Saeed, was convicted for his role in the scandal. The Republican chair of the House Fraud Committee made repeated requests for Omar to show up. No response from Omar.
While the voter shareholders of Minnesota demand a forensic reconciliation of the hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from hungry children, the principal officer responsible for the funding has effectively redacted her presence from the Oversight Committee. This is the Feeding Our Future Accountability Audit, and we are documenting the moment where ghosting the House became a material liability for a representative whose financial disclosure portfolio is already under intense forensic scrutiny.
It's just another example of disrespecting Minnesotans. She thinks she can get away with things like this because she's, a powerful politician, but Minnesotans are fed up. Minnesotans in her district are fed up. They really care about how their money is spent.
I am Camilo Motato, and this is Camilo's House. As a certified public accountant focused on forensic verification, I approach a legislative hearing like a mandatory compliance audit where the senior management refuses to show up for the exit interview. In a standard audit, if the author of a material funding policy fails to certify the results or explain related party transactions with charged fraudsters, you don't just write a letter. You issue a disclaimer of opinion and flag the entire entity for systemic non-compliance. Today, we are auditing the latest fallout from the Minnesota fraud probe. We are analyzing the materiality of Representative Ilhan Omar skipping the state hearing, the documentary evidence linking her to the Safari restaurant site, and the forensic pressure being applied by State Rep. Kristen Robbins as she prepares to liquidate the fraud in her run for governor. The operational trigger for the Feeding Our Future heist was the Meals Act, a federal COVID relief measure passed in 2020 and sponsored by Rep. Ilhan Omar. From an investigative standpoint, this piece of legislation was the operating system that allowed the fraud to flourish. State Rep. Kristen Robbins has certified that the Meals Act created the loose regulatory conditions that allowed organizations like Feeding Our Future to bypass standard internal controls. In auditing terms, when you deregulate the audit standards for federal child nutrition programs without enhancing the oversight infrastructure, you are creating a moral hazard. You are inviting ghost units, fake meals, to be invoiced against a sovereign credit line. Robbins is now demanding a forensic reconstruction of all communications between Omar's office and the Minnesota Department of Education to determine if the Congresswoman was aware of the material weaknesses her bill created before the $250 million capital outlay was stolen. One of the most damaging disclosures in the committee's recent report is the physical evidence of Omar's public promotion of Safari Restaurant. In a Somali language TV appearance, Omar highlighted the restaurant as a primary meal distribution site. From a forensic integrity perspective, Safari Restaurant is an impaired asset. It is one of the primary nodes of the Feeding Our Future fraud, where phantom meals were billed at a rate of thousands per day. Robbins is seeking direct traceability of all emails, texts, and meeting records between Omar's office and the restaurant's owners. As a CPA, I track the nexus of influence. If a member of the board is using their public voice to market a subsidiary that is currently laundering federal funds, the fiduciary liability is immense. The ghosting of the hearing is being seen as a refusal to verify these related party relationships. By ghosting the committee, Omar is essentially redacting the testimony needed to reconcile her ties to the Safari ledger. Representative Kristen Robbins has disclosed that Omar didn't even respond to the formal invitation, effectively ghosting the House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee. In auditing, when an executive refuses to provide representations during an audit, it is considered a scope limitation. It prevents the auditors from certifying the integrity of the office's actions. Robbins has issued a corrective demand. Omar must provide a written response and all requested materials, including communications with nonprofit founder Amy Bach and dozens of alleged co-conspirators, by May 5th. From a risk management perspective, having multiple letters and emails ignored by a federal official is a total breakdown of intergovernmental internal controls. If the CEO of a district cannot be held accountable to the State Oversight Board, the system is in a state of functional default. The Feeding Our Future scandal is just one line item in a portfolio of controversy currently impairing the Omar brand. As a forensic auditor, I look at the consolidated liability. Representative James Comer has disclosed significant discrepancies in Omar's financial filings, jokingly noting that her accountant must have attended a quality learning center. In auditing, inconsistent reporting of personal assets is a primary red flag for systemic ethics violations. Furthermore, Vice President J.D. Vance has publicly flagged Omar for potential immigration fraud, an allegation that impairs the legal standing of her entire career. When you amortize these three liabilities over her current term, you are looking at a politician whose reputational asset value is plummeting. The walls are caving in, and the ghosting of a state hearing suggests she has no valid management response to the audit findings being presented by Robbins and the federal prosecutors. The forensic math of the Meals Act reveals a structural deficit in oversight. Federal prosecutors say this fraud involved the theft of hundreds of millions of dollars, while the larger fraud crisis in the state is believed to be in the tens of billions. For a state like Minnesota, this is an economic catastrophe. Representative Robbins, who is currently ramping up her gubernatorial campaign, is using this audit to de-risk the state's future. She is demanding any and all communications showing how Omar promoted these programs. This is a subpoena for transparency. If the Meals Act is the source document for this $250 million loss, then the author of that document must be jointly and severally accountable to the public. You cannot open the floodgates of federal capital and then redact the receipt when the audit shows the money was liquidated by criminals. My forensic verdict on the 2026 Ilhan Omar ghosting scandal is that we are witnessing the total liquidation of fiduciary duty. You cannot sponsor the bill that liquidates the regulatory controls and then refuse to answer for the $250 million deficit it created. The Safari restaurant promotion is the physical receipt of her involvement, and the May 5th deadline is the final call for subpoena compliance. The Minnesota fraud crisis is a material impairment of the American taxpayer, and Representative Kristen Robbins is recapitalizing the investigation to ensure that frugality is restored to the state ledger. Until Ilhan Omar unredacts her records and certifies her conduct before the committee, she remains a high-risk liability for the people of Minnesota. The accountability trail is hot, and the audit will not be closed until the missing $250 million is reconciled with the legislative intent. I want to hear from you. Is ghosting an oversight committee a legitimate defense of privilege, or is it a material breach of the social contract? Should the author of the Meals Act be held accountable for the $250 million in phantom meals? Let me know in the comments. Your perspective is the only audit that matters when the taxpayer treasury and the integrity of your representative are sitting on the negotiation table. I am Camilo Motato, and this is Camilo's House. Subscribe to stay informed on the numbers, the laws, and the truth behind the headlines. Stay safe.